Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Tonight we're going to be learning Maseches Shabbos, Daf Kuf Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, and Daf Kuf Lamed Daled. A lot of material to get through. I'll be moving at a little bit of a faster clip. And we're going to be starting at the bottom of Daf Kuf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph at the 2 dots, approximately 10 lines or so from the bottom. We learned in our Mishnah that there's a machlokas tanaim as to whether or not one is allowed to do certain preparatory malachos in regards to bris milah. Rabbi Eliezer was a lenient shita who allowed all kinds of malachos to be done in advance of a bris, on Shabbos, I should say, not in advance of a bris, but on Shabbos, even if they had yet to be done, such as, for example, carrying a knife, or, for example, cutting up a tree to make coals in order to then make a knife. Really, malachos in a wide spectrum. But Rabbi Akiva was the dissenting opinion, and that's our starting point this evening. The Gemara opens at the bottom of Kuf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, 10 lines from the bottom. Kol Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Marav Halachak Rabbi Akiva. So he said that we paskin like Rabbi Akiva, that we're more strict. We only allow the bris itself, but we do not allow for all the preparatory malachos to be done on Shabbos. At the same time that that's true, we also have another episode where we see that Rabbi Akiva, where we paskin like Rabbi Akiva in the name of the same Amora, which is Rabbi Yehuda Marav. It's not nami gabe Pesach ki hagavna. We learn the same thing by Hilchos Pesach. Kalam Rabbi Akiva kol malach Hashem shel asos min of Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva taught there by Hilchos Pesach that any activity that can be done prior to Shabbos should be done. So eino doches Shabbos, that cannot violate Shabbos. Mashenki in the shechita itself, if there needs to be a shechita for a korban, obviously. If the tzivui is to do that korban on that day, it needs to be done on that day. You can't do it any earlier. It has to be done on that day alone. So there we say, shechita she'ev shalasos me'er Shabbos toches Shabbos. Amar Yehuda, Amarav halachak Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara's implied question is, why do we need both? Why do we need it to say that they're halachas like Rabbi Akiva in regards to bris milah and by Hilchos Pesach, if the gist is the same, which is that we don't allow for preparatory activities to be done on Shabbos. You should have done it before. You didn't do it before, too bad. You've lost your opportunity. So that's the Gemara's implied question. And the Gemara's explicit answer is v'tzricha. No, we need both of the psakim of Rabbi Yehuda Marav that we hold like Rabbi Akiva in regards to bris milah and in regards to Pesach. Why is that? V'tzricha diashmin and gabi milah. If we only would have had the marimakum by bris milah, hasam hu because by a baby where his bris is not done on time, there's no chiyuv kares for anyone. There's no chiyuv kares on the father because he's not the one getting the circumcision. There's no chiyuv kares on the child because he's only 8 days old and he's not a bar chiyuva. So it can't be that there's nisr kares there. So havamina that maybe we would have thought that only there it's the case that there is no there's no machshirin that are prepared. About Pesach, the Ika Kares, Emelitchu Shabbos, but by Hilchos Pesach, but when a person were to not bring the Korban Pesach, it's a bittul asay. But that's one of the 2 assays in the Torah that has the Chiyuv Kares attached to it. Bris milah is one, and Pesach is the other. So therefore, we needed to say that the din by bris milah to make sure we wouldn't misunderstand Pesach. V'yashmin and gabe Pesach, if we would have had only the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Marav that we hold like Rabbi Akiva by Pesach, there mishum delo nichrusu aleha yud gimel brisos. We don't have the same parameters. By bris milah, we have yud gimel brisos. We have the psukim in Parak Yud Zayin and Breishis, which speaks about bris milah 13 times. Masha Enkein by Pesach. By Pesach, we don't have that idea. So here's what the Gemara reads. That because by Pesach we don't have the Yud Gimel Brisos, and there's no, but by Bris Milah there is, so I might have made a mistake, and I would have thought that one is Docha Shabbos Kamashmal, and therefore we need both to teach me that by Bris Milah and by Pesach we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda Marav, that we paskin like Rabbi Akiva. This Mishnah opens up. This is the Mishnah of a Moel. Lucky me. This is the Mishnah of a Moel, Baruch Hashem, Daf Kuf Lamed Gimel, and the Mishnah reads as follows: Kol tzarchei milah b'Shabbos. You can do all of the activities of a Moel on Shabbos. Moelin uporin and motzitzin. You do the circumcision itself. That's a reference to the outer foreskin, the or ha'orla. Uporin, we tear the inner skin, which is called the or ha'priya. Umotzitzin, we do mitzitza. We'll learn about that more on the Amud Beis. V'nostan aleis b'lanus v'chamon. You're allowed to put on a bandage that has cumin on it. Im lo shachak me'erav Shabbos. And if you forgot to crush up the cumin before Shabbos, lois b'shina v'nostan, you're allowed to chew it on your teeth on Shabbos. and then put it into the bandage. Not so sterile, but certainly was the custom of the day. And also, they used to use a liquid that was made up of wine and oil. But im lo taraf yain b'shemen, if you forgot to whisk it before Shabbos, Erev Shabbos, you can put them in the same container, but you can't mix it like you normally would. You can't be toref it. You can't whisk it in a very efficient way. That is not allowed. You cannot cut a bandage for the baby for the bris itself. You're not allowed to cut a good bandage. Aval, you can take some bandages that are lying around, ones that were not being cut by you right now. Aval korech smartut, you can put some rags on it. If you forgot to bring it to the bris, what should you do? Korech or maybe you can wrap it around your finger, and then you can bring it even through another chatzar, violating some isurit rabbanan. Turning to the top of Kuf Lamed Gimel of a base, let's continue. The Gemara is going to jump right in with a sharp question on the Mishnah. The Mishnah said you can do moalen, you can do poren, you can do motzitin, and you can get the bandages, etc. But it also said at the very opening of the Mishnah that you can do kol tzarech milah. Why say both? Asks the Gemara, Michti, Tani Kulu, you taught me all of the details, and as well, when you opened up, we also learned kol tzarech milah. So what were you trying to teach me with the words of kol tzarech milah? You already told me what the details are. As a little bit of background to answer this question, we need to know a little bit of anatomy. The foreskin has two layers. The outer layer is called the orha orla, which is basically a continuation of the skin of the shaft of the anatomy. And the inner layer of the foreskin is called the mucosa lining. In Hebrew, it's called the orha priya. Now, the orha priya is super sticky. I can tell you as a mole, sometimes it's hard to separate the orha priya from the crown itself. So there are some adhesions between the foreskin and the crown. That's why the first step of bris milah is to separate the crown from the foreskin so that the skin can then be pulled forward to be removed. So that's what the Gemara is discussing here. Why did the Mishnah have to say kol tzarech milah? And the Gemara answers in order to include the following case. What are we including that is allowed to be done on Shabbos? Like the rabbis taught us, a tosefta. Amoel, kol zman shu osek b'milah. Anytime that he's still involved in the bris, chozer, he can go back and remove more skin. Bein al hatzitzin hama'ak v'nesamilah. Either skin that makes the bris not kosher because there's too much skin left over. Bein al hatzitzin she'ein ma'ak v'nesamilah, or even a small amount of the inner lining of the skin, the mucosa lining, the orha priya, a little bit left over, even if you're only removing it because it looks nicer. That's mutter on Shabbos. However, piresh, once you take your hands away from the bris, once you put the diaper on, so then you're no longer allowed to go back on both cases. Let's see what you are still allowed to do. If there are still some tzitzin, some adhesions left over from the orha priya, what can you remove after you've already put on the diaper? Al tzitzin hama'ak v'nesamilah chozer. If there are tzitzin, if there are still adhesions that cover a lot of the anatomy such that the bris is no longer kosher, pasha, you can go back and do it, no different than the initial bris itself. However, al tzitzin she'ein ma'ak v'nesamilah, if there are small adhesions left over but the bris is still kosher, then eino chozer. The Gemara here is bothered, not so much bothered, maybe I should say curious. Who is it that we hold like? Who is this opinion like that when once the diaper is on, that we have certain limitations in regards to tzitzin she'ein ma'ak v'nesamilah? The bris is kosher, but there's still some adhesions left over. Our Mishnah says on this tosefta that we just learned says you're not allowed to remove that skin once you put on the diaper. Whose shita is that? So three possibilities. Let's look at them. Number one, last of the short lines. Amar Rabbi bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shmuel benosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. It's the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel. What does he say? We've learned this already a number of blot ago. Titania, Arba Asar Shechalios b'Shabbos. It's the day of Erev Pesach, and it falls out on Shabbos. That's the day we bring the Korban Pesach. Mafshit Adam HaPesach Ad HaChazed Divi Rabbi Shmuel benosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion that you can skin the animal, but only in the amount that's necessary. You cannot totally skin the animal, just enough to access the parts of the body that have to be brought into the Korban. That's similar to our case of piresh, that once you put on the diaper, once you're done with the bris, you can't go back and remove the tzitzin she'ein ma'ak v'nesamilah, the smaller adhesions. The bris is already kosher. You're done for. No reason why you should be able to do any more. Similar to this sheet of Rabbi Shmuel ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. The dissenting opinion in that Mishnah about the flaying of the skin of the Korban Pesach, so we see the equivalence between our case of the person who's piresh, the mole who stops, and he looks back later after in the aftercare, he sees that there's some extra tzitzin she'ein ma'ak v'nesamilah. That's similar to Rabbi Shmuel ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, and that you're not allowed to complete the flaying of the skin of the Korban Pesach. It says the Gemara, Mimai. Are you sure that comparison is good? Adkan, maybe we could say as follows. In regards to the Korban Pesach, there's no din of zakeli v'anveyu, and because of that, maybe that's why you're not allowed to continue flaying the skin past the point of need. However, in regards to the mitzvah of bris milah, like all mitzvahs, There's no mitzvah of hafshata. It's part of the process, but it's not a formal mitzvah. Mash'en came by bris milah. We do have a din of zakeli and the anatomy should look good after the bris. So achanami, maybe we would assume that Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch would agree that we continue cutting and that this Tosef does not like him. Titania, how do we know about zakeli vanveu? This is the brisa. The brisa writes, zakeli vanveu hisna the fun of the mitzvos. You should make all of your mitzvos beautiful. Also the fun of sukkah, you should make a beautiful sukkah. V'lulavna, v'shofarna, lulav and shofar, tzitzisna, sefer Torah, uchsiv bo lishmo, it should be written in his honor, b'diona, with beautiful ink, v'kulmusna, even the quill should be beautiful, v'lavlar uman, it should be done with a scribe, who is himself a master. V'korcho b'shirai 9, you should wrap the Torah in beautiful garments and to make it stunning. Abishal Omer, he has a different view on zakeli v'anvehu ve'anvehu. Habedomelo, we should be just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mahu rachum, mahu chanun v'rachum, afata heye chanun v'rachum. Now his opinion is not relevant to what we're talking about, but according to the first approach in this price, zakeli v'anvehu is a big din. We need to make sure that the breast looks beautiful. So maybe we would have argued that Rabbi Shmuel ben Yochanan ben Baruch would only say that we're limited in regards to the case of hafshata by the Korban Pesach because there's no zakeli vanveu, but by bris milah he would agree that one is allowed to skin the animal still more. Therefore, we pivot to answer number 2. What is our shita of our tosefta like? Namely, the shita that when we are piresh, when the moel finishes the bris and the diaper is now on the baby, he goes back later and looks and sees that there are mitzitzin she'ein me'akvin asamilu. Who's that like? Elam Ravashi, 1/3 of the way down, kuflam and gimel beis. That is like the shita hamani Rabbi Yossi. What's the shita of Rabbi Yossi? It's not. Mishnah writes, bein shenir be'alel bein shalonir be'alel mechalel len alav Shabbos. In regards to Kiddush HaChodesh, let's say you look up in the sky and either the sky is difficult to discern, but you are a witness to it and you know that it's Kiddush HaChodesh, or the sky is sky clear blue. Everyone under the sun can see it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful night. You can see that it's Kiddush HaChodesh. Either way, Mechalel and Asa Shabbos, you're allowed to violate Tchum Shabbos, to travel, to go to the Bezdin and tell them, it's Rosh Chodesh, I saw the moon, I'm going to be an aid. That's the shita of Rabbi Yossi. That's the shita of the Tanakama. Rabbi Yossi argues, Rabbi Yossi Omer, if the sky is perfectly clear, then you're not the only one who's going to see it. All the Dayanim are going to see it. They're going to go outside for Mincha. They're going to look up to the sky. They'll see a perfect sky. We don't need you to violate Tchum Shabbos for that. And just like you're not allowed to violate Tchum Shabbos, says Rabbi Yossi, when the sky is perfectly clear, so too, you're not allowed to remove the tzitzin she'ein me'akvin asamila. So that's the comparison. Ein mechal lena alav asa Shabbos. Says Gemara, how do you know your comparison is correct? Rabbi Yossi is like our case. Dilma ad kano kamer Rabbi Yossi hasam dilo nitna Shabbos lidchos. By Kiddush HaChodesh, it's not be'etzim a din by Kiddush HaChodesh that you're allowed to violate Shabbos. It's a secondary din. That's not true by Bris Milah. Aval hacha, by Bris Milah, din nitna Shabbos lidchos hachanami. We would have thought that be'etzim, because there's a pasuk like we saw on Thursday night when we learned. The psukim indicate that we are obligated. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to do a bris on Shabbos. So then under such circumstances, maybe Rabbi Yossi would say that you are allowed to remove the tzitzin she'ein me'akvin asamila, in that case, the adhesions, the small adhesions. So therefore, we reject answer number 2 as well. Ella, Amri Nahardoi Rabbanan de Pli Geled Rabbi Yossi. There's a third Mari Makom, by which we learn that the Rabbanan are similar to the Shita of our case, where once the diaper is on and then you see small adhesions, you're not allowed to go back and sever them. It's not. The Mishnah writes in regards to the Lechem Apanim. We know that there had to be Lechem Apanim in the Beis HaMikdash and it had to be Tamid. But how do we define Tamid? Let's see how this Mishnah understands the concept of having lechem apanim consistently. Arba'a kohanim nechnasin shnayim biyadam shnei sdarim, shnayim biyadam shnei vazichin. 4 kohanim go in. 2 of them carry all the showbreads, and 2 of them carry the shnei vazichin, which was frankincense, which was used in regards to the process of the lechem apanim. Then there were 4 other kohanim. Ba'arba makdimin, 4 people went in before them, lifneihem. Shnayim litol shnei sidarim, v'shnayim litol shnei vazichin. 2 of these kohanim would take out all the old showbreads, and 2 of them would carry the old vazichin out. So you had a total of 8 kohanim there. Now, hamachnisin ondim mitzafon ufneim ladarim. 4 of the kohanim would stand. The ones who are going to be entering would stand on the north facing south. The hamotzi, and the ones who are removing the lechem apanim or omdim midarim, they stood on the south facing north. The ones who would take out while the ones who were inserting were inserting. There was never a moment when the showbreads were not on the shulchan. Tifcho shel zeh b'tzad tifcho shel zeh mishum shenemar lefanai tamid. They made it mamish perfect. So the second they pull out the old ones, they were pushing in the new ones. There was never a moment when the shulchan didn't have the breads on them. That's shita number 1, the shita of the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yossi Omer afilu elu notlen be'elu manichin Even if there was a time when the bread was not on the shulchan, we would still consider that to be tamid. Now, the initial sheet of the Rabbanim was of the opinion that if you were to have a time when their shulchan was empty of bread, if you did not do it immediately, then that blank space in time when there was no lechem there, that severed the initial action. And therefore, the new action of putting lechem patim was a new maisa. That's how it's similar to our case of piresh, that once the diaper has been put on, you can no longer go back to remove the tzitzin she'ein ma'akven esamila, because now it's a new maisa. So too by the lechem patim. So that's the havamina, and the Gemara embraces that and accepts that answer, as that is our marim makom, that's our precedent in halacha, the Rabbanan who agreed to our opinion in the Tosefta we saw at the top of this amud, that once one is piresh, that you are no longer allowed to go back to remove the tzitzin she'ein ma'akven esamila. 2/3 of the way down, Tana Rabbanan, mehalkatin esamila, one is obligated to go back and remove the tzitzin ha'ma'akven esamila. Let's say that if you do a bris and there's a lot of or hapriya left over, the din is that you are obligated to go back and remove that on Shabbos, even if you are piresh. V'im lo hilkate, if you don't go back and remove these, anush kares, the punishment is kares. Who's the punishment on? It can't be on the baby. Who's the punishment on? Says the Gemara, money. Who gets the consequence? Amar Rav Kahana, Uman. It goes on the master. It goes on the person who's the expert, which is the Moel. Maski Flar of Papa. Uman lema lahu. The Moel can say, Ona avde palga the mitzvah. I did part of the mitzvah. You finish. You're the father. Atun avdit to palga the mitzvah. You finish it. Now it's definitely not good bedside manner. It's not in that. That's not a good job. If you're a mole, you got to fix the leftover skin. You got to remove the or hapriya. But nevertheless, halachically speaking, it's true that if I only do part of it, at the end of the day, you, the father, are the one with the burden for the bris. So you should be the one who's held accountable. So therefore, the Gemara rejects the possibility that it's the moel. Papa Gadol. We're talking about a person who's older than bar mitzvah, really older than 20, because there's some shitas in the Gemara, not here but elsewhere, that you are not chayev on chiyuvei kares until you're 20 years old. So the Gemara says maybe it's someone who's 25 years old, someone who's older. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work either. Maskif lo Ravashi, Gadol behedjeksi be'va'aral zachar asher lo imo. We have this by Hilchos Pesach, by a pasuk, by the Korban Pesach, that if you're too old, if you're 25 years old and you want to bring a Korban Pesach, you're obligated to do bris milah. You're chayiv kares either way. So that can't be what this Mishnah is teaching us, that mahalkatin, that esamila, if you did not remove the extra tzitzin hama'akven esamila, that you're chayiv kares, it can't be that it's talking about a gadol. We already have a pasuk about that, so we can't have an extra tosefta about it. Ella, the Gemara goes back to its original answer. Who is the one who's chayiv kares in this case? Amar Ravashi lo olam uman, but not in your classical case. What is the case where the uman is going to be chayiv? So that says the Gemara could go into Asa ben Hashmashos to Shabbos for Amrullah lo Maseches. The mole shows up right before Shabbos, and he says, and they say to him, we're concerned that you are not going to be able to have enough time to finish the bris. So then what does he say back to them? The Amar Lahu, he says back to them, Maspekina, I'll have enough time. The Avad, he did the bris, and then there were tzitzin she'ein ma'akven esamila. There were tzitzin ma'akven esamila. The bris was not yet kosher. V'lo istapak, he didn't have enough time. The ishtakak, the chabura, who avad v'anush kares. And then after shkia, he did a chabura. There's no mitzvah bris milah after shkia. You're not allowed to do a bris at night. In fact, the Raman Shulchan Aruch writes, if you do a bris milah at night, it's a 0. You have to do a tafastam bris. That bris is a 0. So, and then it was chayiv kares. That's the case where this brisa writes that you are chayiv kares. V'anush kares. Motzitzin, famous Gemara. What about the obligation to do a bris with mitzitza? Let's read this famous Marim Makom, this very, very critical Gemara, and I'll share just a couple of shitas that are in the poskim today. Amar Papa hay umna de lomites. If there's a mole who does not do mitzitza, sakanahu, it's dangerous for the baby. Ve'arina lein, he should be removed from his post. Pshita, says the Gemara, that's obvious, because what did our Mishnah say? Midikal mechalale ala shabta. We know that you're obligated to do mitzitza on Shabbos, and in fact, our Mishnah says you're mechal Shabbos to do mitzitza. Obviously, sakanahu. Obviously, there's a danger. So what's the havamina? What is it that Rav Papa was teaching me that this person's doing a sakana? We know he's doing a sakana. Answers the Gemara, Ma'adatema, you might have thought, maybe the blood that's being sucked out with mitzitza was blood that was collected and not fresh flowing blood. Kamashman chaburi michbar. He's actually doing a chabura. It is fresh blood, and therefore we therefore see that it's a real chabura. You're violating a real Esther Shabbos, but you're obligated to just like the obligation that there is to put on a bandage and cumin. Just like if a person were to not put on the bandage with the cumin, it would be dangerous for the baby. So too, if a person were to not do mitzitza, they'd also be violating the safe protocols of bris milah. You're obligated to do mitzitza. That's the end of this Gemara. There are basically 3 streams of shitas. I'll share with you each extreme and then the prevalent gray area of the middle of the road. To one end of the spectrum is a sheet of the Sadma Rebbe that if you do bris milah without matzitza b'peh, there's an ikuv in the bris milah, there's something wrong with the bris. On the other side is the sheet of Rav Moshe Tendler and other poskim that because we know why in our Gemara you're supposed to do matzitza, which is that it's a sakana for the baby, but because we have a reason, we follow the stream of thinking about a time about like zera, that because we know nowadays why it is that we have to do matzitza and it's no longer considered dangerous, so then because the ta'am fell away, the sakana fell away, so too the requirement falls away. And then with Moshe Tender, when there's a bris on Shabbos in his shul in Muncie, he would bring over 2 edim to the mohel, and this is wild. He would say to them, you're not allowed to do matzitza. If you do matzitza, here's your formal hasra. If you do matzitza, you're chayv skida b'dei bezdin and you're chayv kares b'dei shamayim. He was very sharp about it because you were not allowed to do the chabura on Shabbos. So that's the other extreme. And the rest of the mo'alim under the sun basically live in the middle plains, which is that the matzitza, the peh is not me'akev. You're even allowed to do a kli. Maybe there's a preference for mitzitza b'peh according to some poskim. Maybe there's specifically not a preference of mitzitza b'peh because of the danger of oral herpes, whatever the details are. Those are the 3 streams of thought in regards to mitzitza. Continuing 4 lines from the bottom, Kuf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, V'nosan alei Spalanis, we put on a bandage. Amar Rabbi, Amar Li Aim. His mother said to him, you may recall that it really wasn't his mother. Abaye was orphaned, and his actual name, according to some, was Nachmeni, and Abaye is the name of Av Hashem, Aleph Beis, Yud Yud. Av Hashem was his father. This wasn't actually his mother. It was some type of caretaker. And she said, Ispelanisa, the kuhu kive, if you're looking for a bandage that solves all of your aches, here's what you should do. Shed minoi tarba, 7 portions of fat, v'chad kira, and 1 portion of wax. Rava Amar kira, yes, there's wax, but it's vikalba, and there's resin, that's the other portion. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. And when Rava was teaching this in Mechoza, Darsha Rava ben Mechoza taught this at that time. Karinhu b'nei Menyume Asya leminayhu. The Bar Menyume family, who were Asya, they were healers. Karinhu, they tore their own clothing. They said, you killed my whole business, Rabba. You gave everyone the secret of how to solve all their medical problems. So what are we supposed to do for our parnasa? Amar Louis said back to them, don't worry. Shavke l'chuchada, I've given you 1 stream of business left. The Amar Shmuel taught Haiman de Mashe Ape Velonagi Tuba. If you wash your face and don't dry it well, Nikteru lechas benisa, your face will end up with boils. Maybe it's acne, maybe it's boils. I'm not exactly sure. Rashi here points out top line, Pana misbakos. His face is going to have these little tiny explosions. So then he said to them, Rava said back to the B'nai, what were their names? B'nai ben Yomi. He said back to them, Kante, what's the medical solution to that? Limshe tuba b'maya de silka. You should take water in which beets were boiled and use that on your face. It will get rid of the acne. Lo shachak mirav Shabbos. What about a person who does not grind up the cumin before Shabbos? You said you can chew it in your teeth. So here the Gemara makes a distinction between Shabbos and Yontif. Reads the Gemara as follows: Tana Rabbanan, Dvarim she'ein osin lemila b'Shabbos, things that you may not be allowed to do on Shabbos, osin la b'Yom Tov. You're allowed to do them on Yontif. For example, shochakin la kimon. You're allowed to grind up the cumin in a regular way. The torfin la yain b'Shem. And remember we said in our mission, you're not allowed to whisk together the oil and the wine. You could just pour it into the same container, but you can't whisk it together. That's restricted on Shabbos, but allowed on Yontif. Ask the Gemara, Amar le Abai le Rav Yosef. We'll see a number of comments today between Abai and Rav Yosef. The reason why we're allowed to grind kamun in a regular way is because it's fit for using cumin in any pot on Shabbos, and we're allowed to cook on Yontif. For any pot on Yontif, and we're allowed to cook on Yontif. But if that's the case, asks the Gemara, Yain b'shemen chazi nami b'Shabbos l'chole. Why in our Mishnah did we say you're not allowed to whisk together wine and oil? It should be perfectly permissible because it's usable for a sick person. Where do we know that? From the Tanya. The Brayta writes in Sorpin Yain b'Shemen l'chole b'Shabbos. The Tanna Kama was of the opinion that, like our Mishnah seemingly, that you're not allowed to whisk together these 2 things. You can put them in the same cup, but you can't whisk them together. However, Amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Mishum Rabbi Meir, Reb Meir says, Af Torfin Yain b'Shemen. Reb Meir was of the opinion that you are allowed to whisk these things together. Amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar, and here's a story to prove it. Pamachas chash Rabbi Meir b'Meir v'vikashnu litrov lo yain b'Shemen. Rabbi Meir himself, Rabbi Meir was the one who allowed the whisking of wine and oil together, and he was sick, and we said, Rebbe, we're going to take care of your stomach illness. We're going to whisk together the wine and the oil. Everything's going to be fine. V'lo hinachnu, he wouldn't let us do it. Amarnu, we said back to Rebbe, I don't understand. Amarnu lo dvarecha yivtu b'chayecha, your own shita while you're alive. You're the one who held that it's mutter to do this. Why are you not allowing us to do it for you? So he said, Omar lanu, he said back, a beautiful hashkafa. Maybe not halacha, but a beautiful hashkafa. Afal pi she'ani omer kach, even though I allow it, the chaverai omrim kach, and my friends don't allow it. Miyomai lo mela'ani libi, I was never able in my heart to violate la'avor al divrei chaverai, to violate the sheet of my friends. Now, what do we see from here? Who nihu de machmir? Was he himself who was machmir? But ladina, he held it himself. Anafshe, he held that for himself. Avalukule al mashari. Everyone agrees that it's permissible on Shabbos. Back to our question: why is it that in our Mishnah we're not allowed to whisk together the wine and the oil if Reb Meir said it's mutter? In our Mishnah, we used a shinui to say you can only put it in the same container. And we said over here that you're allowed on Yom Tov to do the whisking, but why are we not allowed on Shabbos to do the whisking if Reb Meir allowed it? Answer the Gemara, Hasam, over there by Reb Meir, lo bayi lika, not leka, lo bayi lika. By Reb Meir, you don't need a lot of whisking, you just need to put them together. Hacha by Bris Milah, bayi lika, really the ideal way to make it is to really whisk it up very well. That's why you're not allowed to do it, because it's going to be Shabbos and you're not allowed. Hachanami here as well, ne'amid, why by our Mishnah? Why by Bris Milah do we not just say put the two ingredients in the same container and just let it at least at the best of a worse scenario? At least put the oil and the wine in the same container, says the Gemara. Go back and read our Mishnah. Hainu diktani, that's what we learned in our Mishnah. No sin zebifnei atzmo, zebifnei atzmo. You are allowed to do that. So the Gemara here stands clear that by Yom Tov you're allowed to do the grinding, but you're not allowed on Shabbos in regards to the cumin. And by Yom Tov you're allowed to do the actual whisking, but you're not allowed on Shabbos. Continuing 1/4 of the way down, Rabbanan in Misanan and Sachardal the Misanenes Shelo, you are not allowed to filter mustard seeds from its chaff on Shabbos. It had a special filter that they were using specifically for chardal. And as well, the in mamtikin as also begacheles, they used to take the mustard seeds, which were very strong, and what they would do is they would lessen the bitterness, they'd sweeten it, I guess, by putting it on a very hot coal. Now that's allowed on Yom Tov. Amarle Abayler of Yosef, sorry, that's not allowed on Yom Tov. Amarle Abayler of Yosef, this is the second Abayter of Yosef comment. Maishna mihadetnan. We have another Mishnah that says Nosin beitza b'misanenas shel chardal. You can take a raw egg and you're allowed to put it into the sieve that we would otherwise use for chardal. You just can't take chardal. Amarle, hasam lo michse keborer. When you have an egg inside that sieve, it doesn't look like borer. But hacha, in regards to the chardal, it does look like borer. Mechse keborer. I ve'in mamtikin oso begacheles. You said you're not allowed to put the mustard seeds on top of a coal, out of concern that it may put out the coal. But however, v'hatanya mamtikin oso begacheles. We have another brisa that says it's perfectly mutter to put the mustard seeds on top of a gacheles, on top of a coal. Lo kasha. How do we answer this question? Kan begacheles shel mateches, kan begacheles shel eitz. That one is allowed to put it on top of something that's made out of metal, because when you put the chardal seeds on top of the metal heat, it doesn't extinguish a fire. Masha king kan begacheles shel eitz. When you put it on top of a coal that's actually made out of fire, it does in fact extinguish it, and that's not allowed. Amar le Abai le Rav Yosef. Third question. Maishnami bisra agomre. Let's say that it's Yom Tov and you're cooking on a spit. When you take the animal and it's cooking on a spit, some of the oil drips down and it puts out the fire. So that's allowed. If that's allowed, why are we not allowed even on a hot coal, on an actual fire coal? Why are we not allowed to put the mustard seeds? I don't understand why you're not allowing it. So that was the Gemara's question here, and the Gemara answers, Amar le Hasam lo efshar hacha efshar. Another beautiful idea. By the meat, you can't make it on Erev Shabbos, on Erev Yom Tov, as good as you can make it on Yom Tov. And because it's better to make on Yom Tov, it's allowed even at the risk of extinguishing the coal. Hacha efshar, but by the mustard seeds separating them, by the mustard seeds sweetening them, whether it's done before Yom Tov or on Yom Tov, no difference. And therefore, we don't allow for it to be done on Yom Tov. Amar le Abai le Rav Yosef, question 4, Ma'ala gabein, are we allowed to make cheese on Shabbos? Gabein, gavina, can we make cheese? Amar le Asr, he said you're not allowed. Maishnami lisha. We see on Yom Tov you're allowed to bake bread, and you have to knead the flour in order to make bread. So why is that allowed? Amar le Hasam lo efshar, because the challah won't taste as good if it's made the day before. Therefore, you're allowed to do lisha. However, hacha, with the cheese, efshar. If you make the cheese a couple of days before, it's going to taste just as good on Yom Tov itself. So therefore, making cheese on Yom Tov is asr. In Naharda, they said the cheese on the first day is fantastic. Maybe then we should be allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov. Says Gemara, really what they meant to say was as follows: it's even good on that first day, but it's also good when it's made earlier, and therefore we're not allowed to make cheese. Halfway down, 2 dots. In osin lachaluk, you're not allowed to make a garment for them. Amar Abai, the caretaker said to him, Haychaluk tianuka, the bandage that's used for a baby, lepani lesitra leiloi, dilma midbak gardamine. We need to turn the garment that's used as a bandage for bris milah in such a way where the hem is downwards, closer to the body, and away from the tip of the anatomy. Dilma midback, because we're afraid that there will be some garda, some loose strings, mine. Vasili de krus shavcha, they may wrap around the anatomy and sever the blood flow to the anatomy, which can make the child a krus shavcha. Ime de abaya of the kistisa lepalga, she actually made a special lining that she would use to make sure that none of the loose fibers could wrap around the anatomy. Amar Abaye, hayinuka de leis lechaluk, leisi belisa de isle sifsa, belichrche le sifsa le satoy, ve'aifle le iloi. Similar idea that if there is no pre-made garment bandage for the baby, then you should take this special type of rag, but you can't cut it on Yom Tov. You can't make it. You can't on Shabbos. You can't make it this way. But there has to be one that you just find around the house and you wrap it around in a way to avoid having the garments wrap around the anatomy. Amar Abaye, halfway down, Amar Li'aim. If we don't see the rectum of the baby so that he's not able to defecate, how do we open it up for him just when he's born? How do we do that? So it says the Gemara, you should anoint the backside of him in oil. Put him in the brightness of the day, hold him up against the sun with the oil, and you'll be able to see where there's a transparency in the skin. And if you see that, you're allowed to tear that open. You need to tear it open with a pearl of barley, and a plus sign or an X sign, whichever way, cutting it in two directions. However, you can only use that barley if it's made out of metal, because that causes for extensive swelling, and that's not allowed. Another comment from his caretaker, if there's a baby who's not suckling properly during nursing, mekar dekar pume, his mouth is very cold. How do you solve this problem? Lesu kasa gomer, you should get a cup of coals. Velinkete le lahade pume dechaim. You should bring the coals near his mouth. Don't burn him, but bring it near his mouth so that the air he breathes in is warm. And then umait, he'll start suckling normally. Amar Abaye, 2/3 of the way down, Amar Li'eh, my caretaker told me, Hayinuka de lo minshate, linpefe begapevasa. A baby who's not breathing the right way, you should just fan in his face. You should take a fan and put it in his face, and then uminashte, he'll start breathing normally. Amar Abaye, what if a baby is really not breathing well? Amar li'em hayanuka delo me'ave, he's really not breathing well. You don't see his chest heaving. So under those circumstances, leisu salisa de'ime, you should take the afterbirth of the mother. Belishra ke'ilave, you should drag it over his body. Ume'ave, it'll help him to breathe. Amar Abaye, Amar li'em, she said yet another thing. If there's a baby who's super skinny, you should bring the afterbirth of the mother, you should drag it over his body, from the narrower side, from the thinner side to the wider side, as if it has some type of triangular shape. That's what you should do if the baby is super skinny. What do you do if the baby is larger? If the baby is not larger just in size, but he's like swollen, he's benefichus. Rashi writes here that he's benefichus, he just has a lot of swelling. Then you do the same thing. You take that afterbirth and you drag it over him. However, it's me'ulma lekutna, from the wider side to the narrower side. But Amar Abaye, Amar li'em, she said yet another din. Hayinuka de sumak, if a baby is very red, akati lo ivla beidama, the blood has yet to absorb in the body. Lisruchu, you need to hold off on the bris. Lisruchu le adi ivla beidama, until the blood absorbs in the body, then you can give him a bris. Similarly, and very halacha l'maisa, the yarok, if a baby has a high bilirubin count, de akati, girsa change, de akati lo nafal beidama, dame, his blood has yet to sit right. Then lisruchu, you need to wait for the bris. De nafal be dame v'lim haluha. Then you have to wait until the blood settles, and then you can do the bris. We pass in this way halacha l'maisa. If a baby has a bilirubin count above 14 or 14 and going up, then we hold up on the bris. If it's 14 and going down, we do the bris. Says the Gemara, the Tanya, how do we know some stories about this? A couple of great stories until the last word on the page. To Tanya, Rabbi Nasan pamachas halachli lekirche yam. I went to these locations near the water. Uvas isha achas lefanai, and a woman came to me and she said the following awful story. Shamala ben Arishon v'meis, she circumcised her first child and he died unfortunately at the bris. Sheni v'meis, second child too, he died at the bris. Shlishi, she had a third kid, and then Heviyasu, she had a third kid. Heviyasu lefanai, they brought the baby before Rav Nasan abavli. Reisi, I saw the baby. Shu adam, he was red. Amarti, I said to her, Amtini lo achi ivla bodama, wait until the blood absorbs into the body. Himtina, she waited. Himtina lo, she waited. Achi nivla bodama. Ummala, and then she did the bris. Ummala also v'chaye, and the baby lived. The Hayu Koren, so they named him Nasan Abavli at the bris because he didn't die at the bris, Al Shemi, on my own name. Shuv Pamachas Halachti Lemedinas Kaputkia. I went to the city of Kaputkia. The art scroll highlights that this was in Asia Minor. Uvas Isha Achas Lefanai Shemala Ben Arishon Umeis Sheni V'Meis. She had 2 children who Nebuch passed away from circumcision. Shlishi, she had her 3rd kid, Haviyasa Lefanai. She brought me the baby. Ra'isi, I saw 2 things. Shehu Yarok. Number 1, that he was jaundiced. And number 2, Hitzatzti Bo. I looked at the Makom Erva. I looked at the bris. V'lo Ra'isi Bo down. There wasn't a lot of blood there. And Rashi here points out, Rashi on the bottom, Dibra Hamaska, Hachi Garsin Ra'isi Shahaya Yarok Hitzatzti Bo V'lohaya Bo dam bris. Tarti Levius. There were 2 things wrong with the baby. Chada, the first one was that the Imahile Lo Nafak Mine Dama. There was not enough blood in the Makom Habris, and he wouldn't have bled. The Atofas Dam Bris Mitzvah. That's why we have to make sure that we do bris milah with things that generate blood. That's why you cannot do brising with a laser, which automatically cauterizes the skin. There are certain shields that some poskim don't like because it clamps on the skin. Whatever the case may be, that's this Rashi is critical to that idea. Anyways, back in the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, Hitzatzi bo v'lo ra'isi bo dam bris, amarti lo, hamtini lo ad sheyapil bo damo v'himtina lo. He told her to wait until the blood settles. She waited. Umala oso v'chaya. She did the bris and he lived. V'hayu koren shemo nasan abali al shemi. And they named the baby after him. Let's turn to the top of Daf Kuf Lamed Daled on the base. Almost done. Just a few more minutes until we get toward the bottom of the page. A new Mishnah. Marchitin asakatan ben lifnei amila ben la'achar mila. One is allowed to wash the baby in hot water before and after the bris. Umizalfin Allah biyad avalo b'kli. And how do we do this? Seemingly that's the pshat. We'll see machlokas amoraim. We are only allowed to mizalfin, sprinkle on the baby with our hands, but not with a utensil. In contrast to the Tanakama, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer Marchitzin Asakatam Yom HaShlishi, you can only wash him in full on the 3rd day. As we know, Yom Shlishi is Kasher L'Mila, Shechal Yos B'Shabbos, when it falls out on Shabbos. Shene'amar V'hi B'Yom HaShlishi B'Yosam Kohavim, the famous story of Shimon and Levi when they went to go defend the covenant of Dinah, who was raped by Shechem, and they told everyone to a bris, and then they killed everyone because the 3rd day was the most painful. The Mishnah concludes, Suffik androgynous, if there's a person about whom we have a suffix about their bris, and someone who's an androgynous, they have the reproductive organs of both men and women, the Tanakama here holds, Ein Mechalel Anabas HaShabbos, Rabbi Yehuda Matir B'androgynous. He says, you still do the bris on an androgynous. If they have the anatomy, you should be able to do the bris. They have an aver, so you do a bris. Why would you not do the bris? Okay. Machlokes Amoraim, Machlokes Tanaim, excuse me, we'll get to this more tomorrow. I don't understand. Look at the first word of the page, Marchitzin. Next line, you said you can only sprinkle. Can you fully bathe him or can you only sprinkle? Which one is it? Machlokas Amoraim between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabba bar Avuha on one side and Rava on the other. Rabbi Yehuda Rabba bar Avuha Damre Tarvahu Ketzad Ktani. No, the Mishnah is just teaching us the how. What is the how? It works like this. You are allowed to do the washing before and after the bris. Ketzad, how does it work? How does the rechitza work? It's only a ziluf. It's only sprinkling, and it's with your hand, and it's not with a kli. Amar Rabbi, I disagree with you because katani. It still says you can wash the baby, which indicates that you can wash the baby with regular bathing. Otherwise, it should have said mizalfin. So Rav is bothered by that language. He therefore gives a different answer. This is pshat in our mission. You're allowed to do the washing both before and after the bris. Yom Rishon Kedarko. On day 1, that's where marchitzin kicks in, the full language of a full washing. However, Yom HaShlishi, which is what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was talking about, Yom HaShlishi, on the 3rd day of the bris shechal yos b'Shabbos, then mizalfin alav, then you can only sprinkle with your hand of a little bit kli without a utensil. You cannot do a full bath. On that point, on the Yom HaShlishi, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah argues, and he says, Omer marchitzin es hakatar, you can wash him regularly, Yom HaShlishi shechal yos b'Shabbos, shenemar v'yom HaShlishi b'yosam kohavim, and as well, Rava now has a support. What's Rava's support? Tanya, a brisa, the first of the longest lines, Kuf Lamed Daled Rabbi. Let's continue. Tanya Kavasi de Rava, Marchitzon Hasakatan ben Lifnei Amila ben La'achar Mila b'Yom Rishon Kedarko. Just like Rava said, day 1 before and after the bris, hot water, regular bath, no problem at all. What about when the bris was done Thursday and then Shabbos falls out to be day 3? Then Mizalfin Allah biyad. Then you can only sprinkle with your hand. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, what does the Brayta say about him? And he argues there, and that seems to be the pshat in our Mishnah is exactly like Rava. Day 1, according to everyone, you're allowed to wash with hot water before and after the bris. Day 3, machlokas. The Tanakama holds that you can only be mezaleh if you can only sprinkle. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is more lenient, and he holds that you're allowed to be marchitz in a full bath. Concludes this Brayta 4 lines into the widest lines halfway down. Here we see that it's not really a full raya, but just a pasuk that hints at the idea. Yom Hashlishi Biosam Koavim. And then the Brisa ends off seemingly very out of order. What is it ends off saying? When you do that on day 3, according to the Tanna Kama, you're not allowed to use a cup, you're not allowed to use a bowl, you're not allowed to use a kli, ela biyad. You can only do it by hand. Asa on the Tanna Kama, that of course is reflecting back on the initial sheet of the Tanna Kama, and not Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who allows a full bris. Says the Gemara, why is it that it's not a full raya? It's a pasuk. Why would we not say it's a full raya? Says the Gemara, a beautiful answer. Mishum de gadol lo sadik bisra haya, because older people, a gadol doesn't heal quite as quickly as a young child. Katan sadik de bisra haya, they heal differently. So your whole idea that by hibio sam kovim on the 3rd day, it's not the same for a gadol and a katan, and therefore it's not just a zecher ledavar that on the 3rd day you're allowed. Very good. Someone came to ask a shaila, can I bathe my child on Yom Shlishi, on the 3rd day, it's Shabbos, can I bathe my child? And he answered, Ori Lekishmaite. He answered how he paskined, which was that on day 3, Rava felt that the Tanna Kama was of the opinion that you're allowed to be mezale if you can only sprinkle. Ichlish Rava, he got sick. And Rava took this as a siman min hashamayim, and he complained, Omar, Ona Bahade, why did I get involved? Ona Bahade Targimna Desave Lamali. Why did I get involved with these great Rabbanim of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabba? I should have left it alone. Amru le Rabban le Rabba, the Rabbanan said back to him, what are you talking about? You have a brisa to support you. That's what we saw in the 4th line of the Gemara. V'atanya kavasi demar. You have a brisa like you. Amar lahu. He said, you're right, I do. But Masnisin, our Mishnah, kavasaihu deka mimai. How do we know that our Mishnah is really like the opinion of Rabba and Rabbi Yehuda? Midika Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer Merchitzin Asakatam Yom Hashlishi Shechalios B'Shabbos. The fact that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that on day 3, that you're marchitzin, then that if you're going to say that the Tanna Kama was of the opinion that you're only sprinkling, then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is coming to contrast that by saying that you're not just mizalfin, you're marchitzin. That makes sense. If you're saying that the Tanna Kama is talking about washing a full body on day 1, umizalfin biyom shlishi, and that they can only sprinkle on day 3, hi Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, then when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said his shita omer marchitzin, af marchitzin minbayla, it should have said even this, not just that day, but even the 3rd day, because he already allowed it on day 1. So that's why Abai was of the Rava was of the opinion that he might have made a mistake in this psak, and the Gemara ends there with that story. A little bit unclear as to how Rava would really hold. Kiyasa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came to Eretz Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Elazar halachik Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He said that we don't paskin like the Tanna Kama. Rav Dimi said we paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who was of the opinion that on the 3rd day you can do a full bath, no problem at all. Havu Baba Ma'arama in Eretz Yisrael, when he showed up there, they said, let's take a look at Rav Dimi's halacha. First of all, harchatzas kol gufa or harchatzas mila. What is it that you're allowed to do? Your whole body or just the mila itself? Amar Lahu Ahu Rabbanan Rav Yaakov Shmei. There was a rabbi who responded. His name was Rav Yaakov, and he said, "Mistaber harchatzas kol gufo." Seemingly, the whole body should be allowed because the itzal kadai harchatzas mila. If you want to say that it's only the mila itself, that doesn't make any sense because we already have a marim makom that when someone's injured, they can wash themselves. Migar mechamin al gabi maka da Amar Rav. Rav taught us ein monin chamin v'shemen al gabi maka b'Shabbos. You're always allowed to put on some type of medication on Shabbos. So of course by bris mila. So it must be that when we say we hold like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that it even means the whole body. I don't know when this water was warmed up. Was it warmed up on Shabbos? Was it warmed up on Erev Shabbos? A question goes back. The question to a question. Who said that that's what we're talking about at all? That the water was warmed on Shabbos? Maybe Dilma Erev Shabbos. Maybe the water was warmed up on Erev Shabbos. Why do you have to make such a big stink about it? Then Omar Abai, it's too bad he spoke first. I agreed with the questioner. I agree with Rav Yosef. I wanted to answer that question. But Rav Yosef said the same thing. The reason why you're even allowed to boil the water on Shabbos, per his question, is because there's a danger here. Itmar nami, and we'll close with this for tonight. Itmar nami ki asa ravin, Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Abo said it. We don't know the name of who. Halacha Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah ben b'cham shuchum b'Shabbos. Even if the water is warmed up on Shabbos, ben b'cham shuchum b'erev Shabbos, ben archatzas kol gufo. Whether or not you're washing the whole body, ben archatzas mila. Whether or not you're just doing the makam amila itself, everything is mutter under those circumstances. Mipnei shesakana hilo, because there is a danger, and that is why it is mutter. We will pause here for the night. Wishing you all a beautiful night. Shavua Tov.